What if Obi-Wan died on Mustafar and Anakin became the Emperor? Let's explore the depths of this scenario in the video. The crimson blade pierces through Obi-Wan's chest. The Jedi Master's eyes widen in shock. He falls. Anakin Skywalker stands over his former master's body, breathing heavily. The man who trained him, the man who loved him, like a brother, dead by his own hand. But this isn't where the story ends. This is where everything changes. Because without Obi-Wan's survival, without that final confrontation on the Death Star years later, the galaxy faces something far worse than Darth Vader. It faces Emperor Skywalker, a man who killed not just his master, but his own mentor. A ruler driven by grief so profound, it reshapes the very nature of tyranny itself. What happens when the Chosen One doesn't get a second chance at redemption? When there's no old master to show him the light? When Anakin's children grow up not as hidden hopes, but as heirs to the most absolute dictatorship the galaxy has ever known? The volcanic hellscape of Mustafar stretches endlessly in all directions, rivers of molten lava carving their deadly paths through the industrial mining complexes that dot the planet's surface. The air itself seems to burn with heat and sulfur, creating an atmosphere that matches the fury of the two figures locked in their deadly dance, high above the lava flows. Master and apprentice, their lightsabers clash in brilliant arcs of blue and crimson, each strike carrying 20 years of shared history, training, and now, bitter betrayal. But this time, something fundamental has shifted in the currents of the Force. This time, the very fabric of destiny seems to bend around Anakin Skywalker's rage, amplifying his power beyond anything Obi-Wan has ever witnessed. The young Sith Lord's strikes carry not just anger, but a calculated precision that speaks to his complete mastery of every technique his former master ever taught him. Each attack exploits weaknesses that only years of intimate knowledge could reveal, turning Obi-Wan's own teachings into weapons against him. You are supposed to bring balance to the Force, not leave it in darkness. Obi-Wan's voice carries across the industrial platform as he desperately parries another vicious overhead strike. His defensive form, usually so perfect and measured, shows signs of strain, sweat beads on his forehead, not just from the planet's oppressive heat, but from the sheer effort required to match Anakin's relentless assault. I am bringing balance. Anakin's response comes between lightning-fast combinations that force his master to give ground step by step. The Jedi failed the galaxy. They failed me. They failed Padme. Your precious order sat in their ivory tower while Palpatine played them like fools for over a decade. The platform beneath them groans and shifts as their battle carries them across its length. Sparks fly where their lightsabers meet, creating brief moments of blinding light against the hellish backdrop. Anakin's form has evolved beyond anything Obi-Wan taught him, incorporating elements of aggression and raw power that make him nearly unstoppable in single combat. You were my brother, Anakin. I loved you. The words tear from Obi-Wan's throat as he barely deflects a strike that would have taken his head. But even as he speaks, he can see that his former Padawan is beyond reach. The young man he raised, the chosen one he believed in, has been consumed by something darker and more terrible than he ever imagined possible. And I loved you too, Master. Anakin's voice drops to a whisper that somehow carries more menace than any shout. But love isn't enough, is it? Love couldn't save my mother from the Tusken Raiders. Love couldn't prevent this war. Love couldn't stop you from choosing the Council's mission over saving my wife. Obi-Wan tries to leap to the higher ground of a maintenance platform, the same tactical advantage that in another timeline might have saved him. But Anakin has anticipated this move, perhaps even orchestrated it. As his former master reaches the apex of his jump, Anakin reaches out with the Force and yanks him back down with crushing power. The impact drives Obi-Wan to his knees, his lightsaber nearly slipping from suddenly nerveless fingers. Before he can recover, Anakin is upon him, their blades locked mere inches from Obi-Wan's throat. The heat of the crimson energy blade seems to sear the very air around them. You chose this path, Master, not me. You and the Council, with your rules and your blindness and your absolute certainty that you knew what was best for the galaxy. Well, look around you. This is what your wisdom has brought us to. With a surge of dark side power that makes the very air around them crackle with malevolent energy, Anakin breaks through his master's guard. His lightsaber, that weapon of a Jedi Knight perverted into an instrument of vengeance, drives forward with surgical precision. The crimson blade pierces through Obi-Wan's chest, and the Jedi Master's eyes widen in shock and unbearable pain. The sound that escapes Obi-Wan's lips is barely human, a gasp of agony and disbelief that seems to echo across the industrial wasteland around them. His own lightsaber, that faithful weapon that had served him through countless battles, clatters against the metal platform as his strength fails him completely. Anakin, there's still good in you. I can feel it. The words come out as barely more than a whisper, blood flecking Obi-Wan's lips as he speaks. Even in his final moments, even faced with the undeniable evidence of his failure, the Jedi Master clings to hope. The boy I trained, he's still in there somewhere. Then, as gently as a father putting a child to sleep, Obi-Wan Kenobi collapses onto the unforgiving metal of the platform. His eyes, which had seen so much joy and sorrow, so many victories and defeats, grow still and lifeless. The man who had been Anakin's anchor to the light side of the Force is gone, leaving only silence and the distant roar of lava flows. For a long moment that stretches into eternity, Anakin simply stares down at what he has done. The rage that had sustained him through the battle begins to ebb, replaced by something far worse, the crushing weight of absolute reality. This isn't some nightmare from which he can wake. This isn't a vision that will fade with morning. He has killed the closest thing to a father he ever had, and no power in the galaxy can undo what has been done. What have I done? The words escape his lips in a broken whisper as he drops to his knees beside Obi-Wan's still form. What have I done? The second cry is a roar of anguish that seems to shake the very foundations of the mining facility around them. His hands, these same hands that once built podraces and fixed broken appliances for his mother, now shake as they reach toward Obi-Wan's peaceful face. The man who had found him on Tatooine, who had trained him in the ways of the Force, who had stood by him through countless missions and adventures, lies dead by his own blade. The magnitude of his loss crashes over him like a tidal wave of molten lava. But as Anakin kneels there in the aftermath of his terrible victory, the dark side whispers seductively in his mind. Obi-Wan chose this fate when he chose the Jedi over family. He made his decision when he came here to kill you rather than help you save Padme. This is not your failure. This is the inevitable result of the Jedi's rigid dogma and blindness to the truth. The voice in his head sounds reasonable, logical even. It offers absolution for the unforgivable, justification for the unjustifiable. And in his shattered emotional state, with his wife fighting for her life light years away and his mentor's blood on his hands, Anakin grasps onto that voice, like a drowning man clutching debris in a storm. By the time Imperial forces arrive to extract him from Mustafar, Anakin Skywalker has completed his transformation. The conflict within him, the last vestiges of light warring against darkness, has been resolved not through redemption, but through the complete victory of his rage and pain. He boards the shuttle carrying Obi-Wan's lightsaber as a trophy and his former master's body, as evidence of the Jedi's ultimate failure. Meanwhile, in the sterile medical facilities of Polis Massa, a different tragedy unfolds with devastating swiftness. Padme Amidala, the former queen and senator who had dedicated her life to peace and justice, fights a losing battle for survival as she brings her children into the world. But without the hope that Obi-Wan's presence might have provided, without any possibility that Anakin could be redeemed, her will to live fades like a candle, guttering in the wind. The medical droids work with mechanical precision, their sensors monitoring every aspect of her vital signs, but they cannot heal a heart that has been shattered beyond repair. She has felt Anakin's fall through their force bond, experienced his descent into darkness, as if it were her own. The man she loved, the father of her children, has become something monstrous, and the knowledge of it drains away her strength more effectively than any physical trauma. Medically, she is perfectly healthy. Her body shows no signs of serious injury or illness. But the force that connects all living things carries with it not just life, but the capacity for despair so profound that it can stop a heart from beating. The droids, for all their advanced programming, cannot quantify or treat the death of hope itself. Obi-Wan, is he? Her voice is barely a whisper, as consciousness fades in and out like a tide. The medical droid's response is gentle but merciless in its honesty. "I'm sorry, milady. Master Kenobi was killed on Mustafar. Anakin Skywalker is lost to the dark side." Padme's eyes close as if the words were a physical blow. In her arms, two perfect infants cry softly, unaware that they are about to become orphans. She looks down at them with infinite love and infinite sorrow, knowing that she will never see them grow up, never be able to guide them through the darkness their father has helped unleash upon the galaxy. Luke, Leia. She whispers their names like a prayer, as if speaking them aloud could somehow protect them from the fate that awaits. Be strong. Don't let his pain become your own. Those are the last words Padme Amidala ever speaks. Her eyes close for the final time, and despite all the medical technology at their disposal, despite every effort to save her, she simply stops fighting and lets herself slip away into the endless peace of death. The twins cry louder, as if sensing their loss, their small voices echoing through the sterile corridors, like an accusation against the galaxy that has taken their mother from them. When Anakin arrives at Polis Massa, he finds not the reunion he had desperately hoped for, but a scene that completes his transformation into something beyond redemption. His wife lies still and peaceful on the medical table, their children crying in mechanical cradles nearby. The medical droids can offer no explanation beyond the clinical truth. She lost the will to live. But Anakin knows better. He knows exactly what killed her. And it wasn't the physical trauma of childbirth. She died because the Jedi failed to prevent this war. She died because Obi-Wan chose duty over compassion. She died because the galaxy's so-called guardians of peace and justice allowed everything to spiral into chaos and conflict. She died because he wasn't strong enough to save her from a system that values ideology over the lives of innocents. The weight of his losses doesn't break Anakin this time, doesn't drive him to his knees in surrender to despair. Instead, it forges him into something harder and colder than even Palpatine had envisioned. His grief transforms into a white-hot core of purpose, a determination to remake the galaxy so thoroughly that no one will ever again suffer as he has suffered. He gathers his children into his arms, these perfect, innocent beings who represent all that remains of his love for Padme, and makes a vow that will reshape the destiny of billions. No one will ever hurt you. No one will ever take you from me. I will build a galaxy where such losses are impossible, where chaos and conflict and the failures of weak leaders can never again destroy families. The Emperor Palpatine waits in his throne room on Coruscant, savoring what he believes will be his ultimate triumph. His new apprentice approaches, still wearing the black robes and mask that mark him as Darth Vader, carrying the evidence of his complete fall to the dark side. But Palpatine has made a fundamental miscalculation. He believes that Anakin's transformation makes him controllable, that grief and guilt will render him subservient to his new master's will. The throne room's vast space seems to dwarf even the Emperor's considerable presence as Anakin strides across its polished floors. The Red Imperial Guards stand at attention, their weapons and loyalty ready to defend their sovereign against any threat. But no one in that room, least of all Palpatine himself, recognizes the true nature of the threat that approaches the throne. Rise, Lord Vader. You have done well. The destruction of Obi-Wan Kenobi marks the end of the Jedi's relevance to galactic affairs. Now, together, we will build an empire that will bring order to the chaos the Republic has allowed to fester. Anakin stops before the throne but does not kneel. Instead, he reaches up and removes the helmet that has hidden his face, revealing not the scarred visage of a broken apprentice, but the coldly furious countenance of a man who has seen through every lie and manipulation that brought him to this moment. You're right about one thing, Palpatine. The Jedi are finished, but so are you. The Emperor's expression shifts from satisfaction to confusion to alarm in the space of a heartbeat. His hands move toward the lightsaber, hidden within his robes. But Anakin is already in motion. The crimson blade ignites with a sound like tearing fabric. And before Palpatine can mount any defense, it pierces through his chest with the same brutal efficiency that had ended Obi-Wan's life. The Emperor of the Galaxy, the Dark Lord of the Sith, who had orchestrated decades of conflict and manipulation, dies with a look of absolute surprise on his withered features. His body crumples against the imposing throne, his yellow eyes growing dim as the life leaves them. The Imperial Guards move to intervene, but a gesture from Anakin sends them flying against the walls with bone-crushing force. I am the Senate now. The words echo through the throne room with absolute finality. And unlike my predecessor, I will not hide behind manipulation and politics to achieve my goals. Order will be established, and it will be maintained through strength and the absolute certainty that resistance to peace is futile. The news of the Emperor's death spreads through the imperial hierarchy with lightning speed. But rather than causing chaos, it reveals the depth of Anakin's planning. Key military commanders, already swayed by his reputation as a war hero and the hero with no fear, pledge their loyalty to the new regime. Those who hesitate find themselves replaced by officers who understand that the galaxy has entered a new age, one where decisive action matters more than political maneuvering. Admiral Tarkin, ever the pragmatist, is among the first to recognize which way the political winds are blowing. The former Republic Navy officer had served alongside Anakin during the Clone Wars and had seen firsthand the young Jedi's tactical brilliance and utter commitment to victory. When summoned to the throne room to pledge his loyalty to the new Emperor, he does so without hesitation or reservation. Your Majesty, the fleet stands ready to serve. What are your orders? Anakin, now seated upon the throne that had belonged to Palpatine, fixes the Admiral with a gaze that seems to see through everything to the essential truth beneath. Begin with the core worlds. Any system that declares independence from imperial authority is to be brought back into compliance. I want it understood that this empire will not tolerate the chaos and fragmentation that destroyed the Republic. But it's the Emperor's next command that truly demonstrates how different this new regime will be from its predecessor. And Admiral, the first thing I want you to do is locate every slave market, every trafficking operation, every world where sentient beings are bought and sold like property. Burn them all. The systematic destruction of the galaxy's slavery infrastructure becomes the first major policy initiative of Emperor Skywalker's reign, carried out with the same ruthless efficiency that had characterized his military campaigns during the Clone Wars. Entire criminal organizations find themselves facing not gradual pressure or bureaucratic interference, but sudden, overwhelming imperial assault that offers no quarter and accepts no surrender. On Zygeria, the ancient slaving world that had tormented countless species for millennia, Imperial star destroyers appear in orbit without warning. The planet's ruling class, accustomed to operating under the protection of corrupt officials and their own private armies, discover that the new Emperor has no patience for negotiation or gradual reform. Within hours, every slave pen is opened, every overseer is arrested or executed, and the planet's entire governmental structure is replaced by imperial administrators with strict orders to prevent any return to the old ways. The same pattern repeats across the galaxy with mechanical precision. Tatooine, that desert world where Anakin himself had been born into bondage, sees Jabba the Hutt's criminal empire dismantled in a single devastating operation. The fat slug who had considered himself untouchable learns too late that the new emperor takes a very personal interest in the liberation of slaves, particularly those held by Hutts. Coruscant's underworld, where trafficking operations had flourished under the noses of Republic officials for decades, finds itself under siege by Imperial forces, who seem to know exactly where to strike for maximum effect. Crime lords who had operated with impunity suddenly face stormtroopers at their doors and star destroyers over their hideouts. The message is clear and uncompromising. The new order will not tolerate the exploitation of the weak by the strong. But Emperor Skywalker's definition of order extends far beyond the abolition of slavery. His experiences during the Clone Wars have taught him that corruption and inefficiency in government lead inevitably to suffering and chaos. Unlike Palpatine, who had used corruption as a tool to maintain control, Anakin sees it as a cancer that must be excised completely from the body politic. Governors who had grown rich by skimming from relief funds find themselves facing charges of treason, a crime that carries an automatic death sentence under the new Imperial Legal Code. Senators who had taken bribes from special interests discover that their accumulated wealth has been seized and redistributed to the victims of their negligence. Military officers who had allowed equipment to deteriorate while lining their own pockets face courts-martial that end in execution or life imprisonment. The empire that emerges from these purges is lean, efficient, and utterly devoted to the singular vision of its emperor. Where Palpatine had ruled through fear and the careful manipulation of competing factions, Anakin rules through the absolute certainty that his way is the only path to peace and stability. There are no political games, no backroom deals, no tolerance for the kind of systemic dysfunction that had paralyzed the Republic for decades. But this efficiency comes at a cost that becomes apparent only gradually to those living under the new regime. Freedom of speech, already restricted under Palpatine, disappears almost entirely under Emperor Skywalker's rule. Any criticism of Imperial policy is treated as sedition. Any suggestion that alternative approaches might exist is seen as an invitation to the chaos that destroyed the Republic. Artists find their work subject to review by Imperial censors who have very specific ideas about what kinds of messages are appropriate for public consumption. News organizations discover that their editorial independence has evaporated, replaced by official guidelines that emphasize the positive aspects of Imperial rule while downplaying any events that might cause public unrest or doubt. Educational systems across the galaxy are restructured to emphasize Imperial history and the failures of previous governmental systems. Children learn that the Republic fell because of corruption and weakness, that the Jedi Order destroyed itself through pride and blindness, and that only the strong leadership of the Emperor prevents the galaxy from sliding back into the chaos of the Clone Wars. It's within this controlled environment that Luke and Leia Skywalker grow up, raised in the Imperial Palace under the watchful eye of their father and a carefully selected staff of tutors and guardians. Their education is comprehensive and demanding, covering everything from galactic history to military strategy to the fundamental principles of governance. But it's also carefully curated to support the narrative that their father has constructed about the galaxy and his role in saving it from destruction. Luke learns that his mother died during the chaotic final days of the Clone Wars, a victim of the Jedi Order's failure to prevent the conflict that tore the galaxy apart. He's taught that the Jedi were well-intentioned but ultimately misguided, their adherence to outdated principles making them unable to adapt to the realities of modern governance. His father, in this version of history, is the hero who stepped in when the old institutions failed, bringing order and stability to a galaxy on the brink of collapse. Leia receives similar instruction, but her education focuses more heavily on the practical aspects of governance and administration. She learns how to read economic reports, how to evaluate military strategic assessments, how to identify and eliminate inefficiency in government operations. Her father clearly intends for her to play a significant role in maintaining the empire he has built, and her education reflects that expectation. Both children show strong sensitivity to the Force, But their father's approach to training them is vastly different from the traditional Jedi methods he himself had learned. Where the Jedi emphasized emotional control and detachment, Emperor Skywalker teaches his children to harness their feelings as sources of strength and clarity. Where the Old Order preached about the dangers of attachment, their father demonstrates that love and protective instinct can drive someone to achieve impossible things. You must understand that the Force is not some mystical energy that flows through all things according to its own whims. Anakin's voice carries the weight of absolute certainty as he instructs his children in one of the palace's private training rooms. It's a tool like any other that responds to will and determination. The Jedi taught that we should surrender to its guidance, but that kind of passive acceptance is what led to their destruction. Luke, now 15 and showing remarkable aptitude for lightsaber combat, nods seriously as he practices the forms his father has taught him. These techniques are aggressive and decisive, focused on ending conflicts quickly rather than the defensive, prolonged engagements favored by traditional Jedi training. Father, Master Krell, mentioned that some of the old Jedi texts talk about the dark side as something to be avoided. Why would they teach such limiting concepts? Master Krell is one of the few former Jedi to survive the purges. His pragmatic approach to the Force and his willingness to embrace Imperial doctrine having earned him a place as the Royal Children's instructor. His presence serves multiple purposes. He provides expertise in Force training that even the Emperor sometimes lacks, and his example demonstrates that not all Jedi were irredeemably corrupted by their Order's failings. Because they were afraid, Luke. Anakin's response carries a hint of the old pain that still drives him, though he keeps it carefully controlled in front of his children. They created artificial distinctions between light and dark because they couldn't accept that the Force responds to conviction and purpose rather than their narrow definitions of morality. The so-called dark side is simply the Force, wielded by someone who refuses to be limited by fear and doubt. Leia, 2 years younger but already showing signs of formidable intelligence and political acumen, raises a question that demonstrates her growing understanding of galactic affairs. Father, if the Jedi were wrong about so many things, why do some of the resistance movements use their teachings as inspiration? Are they simply misguided? Or is there something more dangerous about spreading those old ideas? Her question touches on one of the most significant challenges facing the early years of Emperor Skywalker's reign. The Rebel Alliance of this timeline forms earlier and with greater desperation than in the original history, driven by the knowledge that there is no possibility of redeeming their Emperor or turning him back to some lighter path. These rebels know that their only option is the complete overthrow of the Imperial system, and they embrace that goal with the fervor of the truly desperate. Mon Mothma, the former senator from Chandrila, operates from hidden bases in the Outer Rim territories, coordinating a network of resistance cells that spans dozens of star systems. Her challenge is immense. How do you fight an enemy who has eliminated the corruption and inefficiency that might otherwise provide opportunities for infiltration and subversion? How do you oppose a regime that has genuinely improved life for billions of citizens, even if it has done so at the cost of their freedom? The answer, she and her allies have concluded, lies in preserving and spreading the ideals that the Empire seeks to erase from galactic memory. The principles of individual liberty, democratic governance, and the right of sentient beings to determine their own destiny become revolutionary concepts under Emperor Skywalker's rule. Jedi teachings, purged from official Imperial doctrine, survive in hidden archives and secret schools that train new generations in the old ways. Bail Organa, still serving as senator from Alderaan but secretly funding and coordinating rebellion activities, has become a master of the kind of careful political maneuvering that the Emperor despises. His world maintains the facade of loyal Imperial compliance while serving as a haven for refugees and dissidents who cannot openly oppose the regime. The irony is not lost on him that Alderaan's peaceful traditions, once seen as naive idealism by many in the Old Republic, now represent one of the galaxy's last hopes for eventual liberation. But it's Bail's adopted daughter who represents the rebellion's greatest secret weapon and most terrible risk. Unknown to anyone except a few trusted allies, Princess Leia Organa is not actually his biological child, but rather one of the Emperor's own offspring, separated from her twin brother in the chaos following their birth, and raised in hiding on Alderaan until political necessity forced Bail to return her to Imperial custody. This version of Leia retains all the memories of her true childhood, hidden away on Alderaan, where she learned about democracy, compassion, and the importance of fighting for justice even when the odds seem impossible. But she has been forced to suppress those memories and play the role of the dutiful Imperial princess in order to survive and protect those she loves. The psychological strain of maintaining this deception while watching her father implement policies she fundamentally opposes creates a complex internal conflict that will eventually drive her to action. For now, though, she serves as the perfect Imperial daughter, attending state functions and displaying the political acumen her father expects from his heir. Her public appearances are carefully choreographed to demonstrate the success of Imperial policy and the stability of the Skywalker dynasty. Citizens see a poised, intelligent young woman who clearly embodies the best aspects of her father's vision for the galaxy's future. But in private moments, when she believes herself unobserved, Leia allows herself to remember what she has lost and what she hopes to eventually reclaim. She maintains secret contact with the rebellion through channels so deeply buried that even Imperial intelligence cannot detect them. Her position gives her access to strategic information that proves invaluable to resistance operations, though she must be extraordinarily careful about how and when she shares such intelligence. The discovery of her true loyalties will come not through any failure of tradecraft or security, but through the Force connection that links her to her father and brother. As she grows older and her natural Force sensitivity develops, maintaining the mental barriers that hide her true thoughts becomes increasingly difficult. Emperor Skywalker is not just a political leader, but a powerful Force user who can sense deception and hidden motivations in those around him. The first crack in her carefully maintained facade comes during a state dinner attended by representatives from across the galaxy. A delegate from Ryloth makes an offhand comment about the improved treatment of Twi'lek workers under Imperial labor policies. And Leia's reaction is just slightly too controlled, too careful to be entirely natural. Most observers would notice nothing, but her father's Force-enhanced perceptions pick up the subtle signs of suppressed emotion. Later that evening, as Leia prepares for bed in her private chambers, she finds the Emperor waiting for her. His presence fills the room with an aura of controlled power that makes the air itself seem heavier. When he speaks, His voice carries the same gentle tone he has always used with his children. But underneath it lurks something far more dangerous. You seemed troubled tonight during dinner, Leia. The delegate from Ryloth's comments appeared to disturb you more than I would have expected. Is there something you'd like to discuss? The question is phrased casually, almost conversationally, but Leia recognizes it for what it truly is. A test. Her father suspects something, though she cannot be certain how much he knows or merely suspects. Her response must be perfect, revealing nothing while seeming to reveal everything. I was thinking about the workers we discussed, Father. Sometimes I wonder if our policies truly address their individual needs, or if we risk treating them as statistics rather than people. I suppose I was imagining what it would be like to be in their position, completely dependent on imperial benevolence for basic dignities. It's a masterful response, framing her emotional reaction as excessive empathy rather than political disagreement. It acknowledges the Emperor's policies while subtly questioning their implementation, exactly the kind of thoughtful critique he has encouraged his children to develop. For a moment, Leia believes she has successfully deflected his suspicion, but then Emperor Skywalker steps closer, and she can feel the weight of his attention like a physical force pressing against her mind. His next words shatter any illusion that she has fooled him. Interesting. Most people, when they imagine themselves in positions of powerlessness, focus on their own fear or discomfort. But you seem to be thinking about justice, about the moral implications of our policies for their own sake, rather than their effect on you personally. It's a very noble perspective, Leia. Almost like something the old Jedi might have taught. The accusation hangs in the air between them like a blade waiting to fall. Leia knows that her next words will determine not just her own fate, but potentially the fate of everyone she has worked to protect. The rebellion's networks, Bail Organa's activities, the hidden schools and archives that preserve the old ways, all of it could be exposed if she makes the wrong choice in this moment. Instead of denying the accusation or trying to deflect it further, Leia chooses a different approach entirely. She meets her father's gaze directly and allows some of her real thoughts to show through her carefully maintained barriers. Maybe they would have, Father, and maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. You've taught Luke and me to think critically about governance, to consider the effects of our policies on real people rather than just accepting whatever we're told. If that kind of thinking was also part of Jedi training, perhaps that's one area where they weren't completely wrong. The response is calculated to appeal to Emperor Skywalker's ego while simultaneously defending principles he opposes. By framing her perspective as the result of his own teaching rather than outside influence, she makes it much harder for him to condemn her thoughts without implicitly criticizing his own methods. But the gambit only partially succeeds. While her father's expression softens slightly, she can sense that his suspicions have not been entirely allayed. The Force connection between them carries undertones of doubt and watchfulness that make it clear their conversation is far from over. You raise an interesting point, Leia. Perhaps we should discuss this further tomorrow. I think it would be valuable for you to spend some time reviewing the historical records of Jedi governance, to better understand why their approach ultimately failed. Despite its superficial appeal, it's a dismissal, but also a warning. The Emperor is giving her an opportunity to reconsider her position and align herself more closely with Imperial doctrine. The implicit threat is clear. Further deviation from acceptable thinking will not be tolerated, regardless of their familial relationship. After her father leaves, Leia sits alone in her chambers and confronts the terrible reality of her situation. Her position as the Emperor's daughter provides her with unprecedented access to strategic information and decision-making processes, making her potentially invaluable to the rebellion. But that same position also makes her one of the most closely watched people in the galaxy, subject to scrutiny that will eventually expose her true loyalties no matter how careful she is. The solution she eventually reaches is as desperate as it is dangerous. If she cannot maintain her deception indefinitely, then she must find a way to turn the situation to the rebellion's advantage before her cover is blown. This means accelerating her timeline and taking risks that could get her killed. But it also means potentially striking a blow against the Empire that could change the course of the galactic conflict. Her first step is to establish contact with Luke, testing whether her brother might be turned against their father, or at least convinced to question the official Imperial narrative. This proves to be more difficult than she had hoped, as Luke has been thoroughly indoctrinated with Emperor Skywalker's version of galactic history and shows no signs of doubt about the righteousness of Imperial rule. Luke, have you ever wondered what would have happened if the Clone Wars had ended differently? If the Jedi had found a way to make peace instead of fighting until they destroyed themselves? Her brother's response reveals the depth of his conditioning and the challenge she faces in trying to reach him. Why would I wonder about hypothetical scenarios that could never have worked? The Jedi's philosophy made them fundamentally unable to deal with the realities of governing a galaxy. Peace without strength is just an invitation for chaos and exploitation. The conversation makes it clear that any attempt to turn Luke against their father will require more than philosophical discussions or appeals to abstract principles. He would need to see concrete evidence of Imperial wrongdoing, or experience firsthand the kind of suffering that Emperor Skywalker's policies create for those who oppose them. Such evidence exists, but accessing it would require Leia to risk exposure in ways that could destroy not just herself, but the entire rebellion network she has worked to protect. The decision she faces is essentially whether to sacrifice her position and safety for the chance to save her brother's soul, knowing that failure would doom any possibility of resistance to the Empire's continued expansion. The choice becomes easier when she discovers the existence of Obi-Wan Kenobi's final message, hidden deep within the Imperial archives and accessible only to those with the highest security clearances. The recording was made just before the Jedi Master's death on Mustafar, a final attempt to reach the children of Anakin Skywalker, should they ever have the opportunity to learn the truth about their heritage. Finding and accessing the message requires Leia to use every skill she has developed over years of covert operation, plus several new risks that could expose her immediately if discovered. Imperial security maintains multiple layers of protection around the most sensitive historical records, and accessing them requires her to forge authorization codes and bypass biometric scanners in ways that leave traces only the most sophisticated analysis could detect. But the message, when she finally manages to view it, provides exactly the kind of evidence she needs to potentially reach her brother. Obi-Wan's words, recorded in the final hours of his life, paint a picture of Anakin Skywalker that contradicts everything Luke has been taught about their father's heroic transformation of the galaxy. Luke, Leia, if you are watching this, then the worst has come to pass. Your father has walked too far down a dark path for me to bring him back, and I have failed in my duty to protect you from the consequences of that fall. But I want you to know the truth about who you are and where you come from. Because that truth may be the galaxy's only hope for eventual healing. The recording goes on to describe the man Anakin Skywalker had been before his fall. Compassionate, brave, deeply committed to protecting the innocent and fighting for justice. But it also details his struggles with attachment, his fear of loss, and the way those very human emotions were twisted and exploited by those who sought to use him for their own ends. Your father was the best of us in many ways, but he was also the most vulnerable to the kind of pain that can transform love into tyranny. He couldn't bear the thought of losing those he cared about, and that fear made him willing to do terrible things in the name of protection. The man who now rules the galaxy believes he is saving it, but he is actually destroying everything that made it worth saving in the first place. Obi-Wan's image flickers slightly as the recording continues, his voice carrying the weight of profound sadness and regret. I failed him as a teacher, failed to help him find balance between his emotions and his duties. But you are not bound by his failures or mine. You have the potential to choose a different path, to find the strength that comes from accepting loss rather than fighting it, from protecting others without controlling them. The message concludes with specific information about hidden Jedi training sites and contact protocols for rebellion cells, resources that could provide Luke and Leia with alternatives to their father's vision of galactic order. But more importantly, it offers them a different understanding of their own heritage and potential, one that doesn't require them to repeat their father's mistakes. Armed with this knowledge, Leia makes the most dangerous decision of her young life. She decides to share the recording with Luke, knowing that his reaction could either save him from their father's influence or result in her immediate exposure and execution. The risk is enormous, but the potential reward, turning the Emperor's own son against his regime, could change the entire course of the galactic conflict. She chooses her moment carefully, waiting for one of the rare occasions when she and Luke are alone together without the possibility of surveillance or interruption. Their father has departed Coruscant for a series of inspections on recently pacified worlds, and the reduced security protocols in the palace provide a brief window of opportunity. Luke, there's something I need to show you. Something about our family, about our father, that you need to see. Her voice carries an urgency that immediately captures his attention, though she can see the suspicion in his eyes as well. Throughout their childhood, she has been careful never to directly challenge imperial doctrine in his presence, making her current approach a significant departure from established patterns. What are you talking about, Leia? Father has always been honest with us about our history, about what happened during the Clone Wars and why the Empire was necessary. His response reveals the depth of his conditioning, but also a hint of curiosity that suggests he might be reachable if presented with sufficiently compelling evidence. Rather than trying to argue with words, Leia simply activates the hidden holocron that contains Obi-Wan's message. The blue-tinged image of the Jedi Master materializes between them, and she watches her brother's face carefully as the recording begins to play. His initial reaction is skepticism and anger. This is exactly the kind of Jedi propaganda their father has warned them about. But as the message continues, his expression gradually shifts to uncertainty, and then to something approaching horror. The moment when Obi-Wan describes their mother's actual cause of death hits Luke like a physical blow. According to the official Imperial history, Padmé Amidala died in the chaos of the Clone Wars' final battles, a victim of Jedi incompetence and Republic corruption. But the recording tells a different story. She died of heartbreak, unable to live with the knowledge of what her husband had become. This can't be true. Luke's voice is barely a whisper as the implications sink in. Father saved the galaxy from the Jedi. He brought order where there was chaos. He's not. He wouldn't. But even as he protests, Leia can see that Obi-Wan's words have planted seeds of doubt that will be impossible to ignore. The recording's emotional authenticity, the specific details it provides about events and people, the way it explains inconsistencies in the official Imperial narrative, all of it combines to create a picture that is disturbingly convincing. Luke, I know this is difficult to accept. I've been struggling with it myself ever since I found this recording. But we have to face the possibility that everything we've been taught about our father might be carefully constructed lies designed to make us complicit in his tyranny. The conversation that follows stretches deep into the night, as Leia shares additional evidence she has gathered over years of careful investigation. Documents that show the true scope of Imperial oppression, recordings of resistance fighters describing their motivations, statistical analyses that reveal the human cost of Emperor Skywalker's efficient governance. Each piece of information is like another crack in the foundation of Luke's worldview. But the final blow comes when Leia reveals her own secret activities. Her work with the rebellion and her knowledge of their father's crimes against innocent populations who refuse to submit to Imperial authority. The revelation that his own sister has been living a double life, fighting against everything he has been raised to believe in, forces Luke to confront the possibility that he has been fundamentally wrong about the nature of their father's regime. You've been a rebel this entire time? You've been working against our own father? The accusation carries hurt and betrayal, but also a growing understanding that the world is far more complex than he had been taught to believe. I've been working for the people our father claims to protect. Luke, I've been trying to preserve the values that our mother died believing in, the ideals that the Jedi represented at their best. Our father may believe he's bringing order to the galaxy, but that order comes at the cost of everything that makes life worth living. The argument that follows is passionate and painful, as years of conditioning clash with newly revealed truths. Luke's loyalty to their father runs deep, rooted not just in filial obligation but in genuine admiration for the man he believes Emperor Skywalker to be. The idea that this heroic figure might actually be a tyrant who has built his empire on lies and oppression is almost too devastating to accept. But the evidence is overwhelming, and Luke's own Force sensitivity allows him to sense the sincerity behind Leia's words. As painful as it is to acknowledge, the truth has a resonance that no amount of Imperial propaganda can match. By the time their conversation ends, Luke has not fully turned against their father, but he has begun to question everything he has been taught about the Empire and his family's role in galactic affairs. The change in Luke's demeanor does not go unnoticed when Emperor Skywalker returns to Coruscant. The young man who had always shown unwavering confidence in Imperial doctrine now displays subtle signs of doubt and internal conflict that his father's Force-enhanced perceptions immediately detect. The shift is slight enough that most observers would miss it entirely. But to someone with Anakin's sensitivity to emotional undercurrents, it might as well be a beacon announcing that something fundamental has changed. The confrontation comes during what should have been a routine family dinner, a weekly tradition that Emperor Skywalker has maintained despite the demands of governing a galaxy. The meal begins normally enough, with discussions of current events and administrative matters, but the undercurrents of tension are palpable to anyone capable of sensing them. Luke, you seem distracted tonight. Is there something on your mind that you'd like to discuss? The question is posed casually, but both children recognize it as anything but casual. Their father's tone carries the same dangerous undertones that have preceded some of his most ruthless political decisions. Luke's response is carefully measured, an attempt to deflect suspicion while acknowledging that his emotional state has changed. I've been thinking about some of the historical materials in the archives, Father. There are aspects of the transition from Republic to Empire that I'm trying to understand more fully. Some of the accounts seem contradictory. It's a clever approach, framing his doubts as academic curiosity rather than political disagreement. But Emperor Skywalker is far too experienced in detecting deception to be fooled by such tactics. His next question cuts directly to the heart of the matter. Which account specifically? I'd be happy to clarify any confusion you might have about the historical record. After all, I was present for most of the events you're studying. My perspective might help resolve any apparent contradictions. The offer sounds generous, but Luke recognizes it for what it truly is: a trap. Any specific questions he asks will reveal the direction of his thinking and potentially expose Leia's involvement in his growing doubts. But refusing to engage will only confirm their father's suspicions and likely lead to more intensive scrutiny. Well, for example, there are different versions of how the Jedi Order actually ended. Some sources suggest they were destroyed in battle. Others imply they were executed after surrendering. The details seem to vary depending on which archive section you access. Luke's question is carefully chosen to probe for information without revealing how much he has already learned. But his father's reaction makes it clear that the strategy has failed. Emperor Skywalker's expression shifts almost imperceptibly, but the change in the room's atmosphere is unmistakable. I see. And what conclusions have you drawn from these varying accounts? Do you have theories about which version might be more accurate? The question hangs in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Luke realizes that his next words will determine not just his own fate, but potentially Leia's as well. Their father clearly suspects that someone has been sharing unauthorized information, and if Luke's response confirms those suspicions, the consequences could be devastating for everyone involved. Instead of trying to deflect further, Luke makes a decision that surprises everyone present, including himself. He meets his father's gaze directly and speaks with the kind of honesty that has always characterized their relationship. I think the truth is probably more complex than any single account suggests. Father, wars are chaotic, and the people involved often have different perspectives on the same events. But I also think that maybe I'm old enough now to hear your first-hand account of what actually happened, rather than relying on second-hand sources that might be incomplete or biased. The response is masterful in its simplicity. By appealing to their father's ego and asking for his personal perspective, Luke transforms a potentially confrontational moment into an opportunity for the Emperor to control the narrative. It's exactly the kind of political maneuvering that their father has taught both children to employ when faced with difficult situations. Emperor Skywalker's reaction confirms that the strategy has worked, at least partially. His posture relaxes slightly, and when he speaks, his voice carries the tone of a teacher rather than an interrogator. You're right, Luke. You are old enough to understand the complexities of what happened during those final days. The transition from Republic to Empire wasn't as clean and orderly as the simplified histories suggest. There were difficult choices that had to be made, actions that were necessary but not pleasant to contemplate. What follows is Emperor Skywalker's own version of the events surrounding the end of the Clone Wars and the establishment of his regime. It's a carefully constructed narrative that acknowledges some of the harsh realities while justifying them within the framework of necessary governance. The Jedi, in his telling, were tragic figures who couldn't adapt to changing circumstances and ultimately had to be removed for the good of the galaxy. The key difference between his account and the official Imperial histories is its emotional honesty. Rather than portraying himself as a flawless hero, Emperor Skywalker admits to the pain and doubt he experienced during the transition period. He describes the weight of making decisions that affected billions of lives, the loneliness of absolute power, and the terrible responsibility of reshaping galactic civilization. But most importantly, he explains his motivations in terms that both Luke and Leia can understand: the protection of family and the prevention of loss. Every harsh policy, every authoritarian measure, every restriction on freedom is justified as necessary to prevent the kind of chaos and suffering that characterized the Republic's final years. The Jedi taught that attachment leads to suffering, that we should accept loss as natural and inevitable. But I couldn't accept that philosophy when it came to the people I loved. I had already lost too much to stand by and watch the galaxy tear itself apart through political incompetence and moral cowardice. By the time he finishes speaking, Emperor Skywalker has accomplished something remarkable. He has acknowledged the darker aspects of his rule, while simultaneously justifying them in terms that make them seem not just necessary, but morally imperative. It's a performance that demonstrates why he has been so successful at maintaining control over a galaxy that should, by all rights, be in constant rebellion against his authority. Luke's response reveals how effective the strategy has been. Rather than being horrified by revelations about Imperial brutality, he finds himself sympathizing with his father's impossible position and understanding the logic behind decisions that once seemed inexplicable. I can see why you made the choices you did, Father. The responsibility must have been overwhelming. But doesn't the success of your policies prove that the Empire was the right solution? The galaxy is more peaceful and prosperous now than it has been in centuries. The comment fills Emperor Skywalker with visible satisfaction, confirming that his son remains fundamentally loyal despite his recent doubts. But Leia's reaction is quite different. She recognizes the conversation as a masterclass in manipulation, a demonstration of how their father uses emotional truth to obscure moral complexity. Her own response is carefully neutral, but the undercurrents of resistance are impossible to hide entirely. It's certainly true that the Empire has achieved remarkable stability, Father. I think Luke and I both appreciate the sacrifices you've made to bring us to this point. The question now is how we maintain that stability while ensuring that future generations don't have to make the same kinds of difficult choices. Her words are diplomatically phrased, but they carry implications that don't escape their father's notice. The suggestion that future governance might require different approaches, that the current system might not be the final solution to galactic problems represents exactly the kind of thinking that Emperor Skywalker cannot tolerate. The family dinner ends on a note of superficial harmony, but all three participants understand that fundamental issues remain unresolved. Luke has been partially brought back into the fold through emotional manipulation and selective revelation, but his doubts have not been entirely erased. Leia's position has become even more precarious, as her father clearly suspects her of harboring dangerous thoughts, even if he cannot yet prove active rebellion. In the days that follow, both children find themselves under increased scrutiny as Imperial security begins conducting more thorough background checks on palace staff and reviewing access logs for sensitive areas. The investigation is ostensibly routine, part of regular security protocols, but its timing and scope make it clear that Emperor Skywalker is looking for evidence of unauthorized information sharing. Leia realizes that her time is running out. The careful network of contacts and safe houses that has allowed her to operate undetected for years is beginning to unravel under the pressure of intensive investigation. Soon, the evidence trail will lead directly to her. And when that happens, the consequences will extend far beyond her own fate to encompass everyone she has worked to protect. Her decision to accelerate her timeline and take desperate action comes when she learns that Imperial forces are preparing to assault one of the rebellion's most important hidden bases. The operation will not only destroy vital resistance infrastructure, but also result in the capture and execution of dozens of key leaders who represent years of careful organizational work. The only way to prevent the disaster is to warn the rebels before the Imperial attack launches. But doing so will require Leia to use communication channels that will immediately expose her involvement. She faces a choice between preserving her cover and saving lives, between maintaining her position for potential future operations and protecting people who are counting on her for their survival. The decision, when it comes, reflects the values that Bail Organa instilled in her during her childhood on Alderaan. The lives of fellow rebels matter more than strategic considerations, and the principles of loyalty and sacrifice that define the rebellion must guide her actions even when the costs are enormous. Using codes and protocols that she has kept hidden for years, Leia transmits a warning that allows the rebel base to evacuate before Imperial forces arrive. The operation saves dozens of lives and preserves crucial intelligence networks, but it also creates a communication signature that Imperial security traces back to the palace within hours. When the evidence is presented to Emperor Skywalker, his reaction is not surprise, but something closer to resigned disappointment. The investigation has confirmed what his instincts had already told him. His own daughter has been working against him for years, using her position and access to undermine the empire he built to protect her. The confrontation takes place in the throne room, that vast space where so many crucial decisions have been made over the years. Leia stands before her father's throne, flanked by Imperial guards whose loyalty is absolute and whose weapons are ready to carry out whatever judgment is pronounced. The formal setting makes it clear that this is not a family discussion but an Imperial trial with predetermined outcomes. Leia, you have been accused of treason against the Empire and collaboration with rebel terrorists. The evidence against you is overwhelming and undeniable. Before I pass sentence, I want to give you one final opportunity to explain your actions and perhaps demonstrate some understanding of the magnitude of your betrayal. Emperor Skywalker's voice carries the weight of absolute authority. But underneath the formal language, Leia can hear the pain of a father whose child has chosen to reject everything he has tried to build for her. The personal and political have become inseparably intertwined, making this moment both a state proceeding and a family tragedy. Leia's response draws on everything she has learned about courage and principle during her years of secret resistance work. Rather than pleading for mercy or trying to justify her actions in terms her father might accept, she chooses to stand by her convictions and speak truth to power, regardless of the consequences. Father, I haven't betrayed the Empire. I've tried to save it from becoming something that our mother would never have recognized. The peace you've built is real, but it's the peace of the grave. You've eliminated conflict by eliminating choice, created order by destroying everything that makes life worth living. Her words echo through the throne room with devastating clarity. Each phrase carefully chosen to challenge not just imperial policy, but the fundamental assumptions that guide her father's worldview. She is not asking for forgiveness or offering compromise. She is declaring her absolute opposition to everything he represents. The galaxy doesn't need a perfect ruler, Father. It needs the freedom to make its own mistakes and learn from them. You've appointed yourself as the ultimate arbiter of right and wrong. But that kind of absolute power corrupts even the best intentions. You've become exactly what the Jedi feared the dark side would make you. A tyrant who believes his own propaganda about benevolent dictatorship. Emperor Skywalker's reaction to his daughter's defiance is complex and multi-layered. Part of him admires her courage and conviction, recognizing in her words the same passionate commitment to justice that once drove him to fight against the injustices of his own youth. But a larger part sees only ingratitude and dangerous naivety, the kind of idealistic thinking that led to the Republic's collapse and the Jedi's destruction. You speak of freedom as if it were an absolute good, Leia. But you've never seen what unrestricted freedom actually produces. I've watched entire star systems tear themselves apart through civil war, seen planetary governments collapse into chaos because they couldn't make the hard choices necessary for survival. The peace I've built may not be perfect, but it's better than the alternative. His response reveals the fundamental philosophical divide that separates them. She believes in the inherent worth of individual choice, even when it leads to suboptimal outcomes, while he has concluded that the prevention of suffering justifies any restriction on liberty. Neither position is entirely wrong, but they are ultimately incompatible worldviews that cannot coexist within the same political system. The trial concludes with Emperor Skywalker's pronouncement of sentence, a decision that reflects both his role as imperial ruler and his position as betrayed father. Leia is condemned to death for treason, but her execution is stayed pending one final attempt to bring her back into the fold. She will be imprisoned in the palace's most secure detention facility, while he decides whether familial love can overcome political necessity. But the trial has been observed by Luke, hidden in the shadows of the throne room's upper galleries, and his reaction to watching his sister sentenced to death finally completes his transformation from dutiful son to potential rebel. The philosophical arguments and historical evidence that Leia had shared with him suddenly become viscerally real as he watches his father choose political expediency over family loyalty. The Luke Skywalker who emerges from that throne room is fundamentally different from the young man who entered it. His faith in his father's benevolence has been shattered by witnessing firsthand the consequences of challenging imperial authority. His understanding of the Empire's true nature has evolved from abstract knowledge to personal experience. Most importantly, His sense of duty has shifted from loyalty to the regime that raised him to loyalty to the sister, who opened his eyes to its true character. The escape plan that Luke develops over the following days draws on every skill he has learned during his years of training, but applies those abilities toward goals that would horrify his instructors. Imperial security protocols, combat techniques, political maneuvering strategies, all of it becomes part of an elaborate scheme to free Leia and escape Coruscant before their father can prevent their departure. The plan requires precise timing and enormous risk, as Luke must navigate palace security systems designed to prevent exactly the kind of infiltration he is attempting. But his position as the Emperor's son provides him with access and authority that external rebels could never achieve, allowing him to move through restricted areas and override security protocols that would stop anyone else. The actual rescue unfolds with the kind of desperate efficiency that characterizes the best rebellion operations. Luke's inside knowledge allows him to bypass most of the detention facility's defenses, while his Force abilities enable him to overcome the few obstacles that cannot be circumvented through conventional means. Within hours of beginning the operation, he has freed Leia and stolen a ship capable of carrying them beyond Imperial space. But their escape does not go unnoticed, and the pursuit that follows represents Emperor Skywalker's personal response to his children's betrayal. The man who had built an empire through careful calculation and strategic patience abandons all pretense of political restraint when faced with the loss of his family. The resources he mobilizes for their capture dwarf anything the rebellion has faced in years of conflict, as Star Destroyers and elite squadrons comb the galaxy for any trace of the fugitive heirs. The chase sequence that follows takes Luke and Leia across multiple star systems as they attempt to reach rebellion safe houses while staying ahead of Imperial forces that seem to anticipate their every move. Their father's knowledge of their psychology and training gives him enormous advantages in predicting their likely actions, while their Force connection provides him with a method of tracking that conventional sensors cannot match. But the pursuit also provides the twins with their first real experience of the rebellion's capabilities and character. The safe houses they encounter are staffed by ordinary citizens who have chosen to risk everything for the chance of eventual freedom. The resistance fighters who help them evade capture are motivated not by personal ambition or material gain, but by genuine commitment to principles larger than themselves. Each interaction with rebels reinforces Leia's conviction that the Empire must be opposed, regardless of the personal cost, while gradually convincing Luke that the resistance represents something worthy of his loyalty and sacrifice. By the time they finally reach the main rebellion base, both twins have completed their transformation from Imperial heirs to committed revolutionaries. The reunion with Mon Mothma and other rebellion leaders provides Luke and Leia with their first comprehensive briefing on the true scope of Imperial oppression and the resistance efforts that have been mounting against it. The information they receive fills in gaps in their understanding, while confirming their worst fears about their father's regime. But the meeting also forces them to confront uncomfortable questions about their own roles in the conflict ahead. Their intimate knowledge of Imperial operations and their personal connection to Emperor Skywalker make them potentially invaluable intelligence assets, but that same connection also makes them security risks, whose capture could devastate the entire rebellion. The solution that emerges from these discussions reflects the desperate nature of the rebellion's situation and the unique opportunities presented by the Emperor's own children joining their cause. Rather than hiding Luke and Leia away for their protection, the rebellion decides to use their presence as the foundation for the most ambitious operation in Resistance history, a direct assault on the Emperor himself. The plan that takes shape over the following weeks is audacious to the point of seeming impossible. Using Luke and Leia's knowledge of Imperial defenses and their ability to access restricted areas, a small strike team will infiltrate the Imperial Palace during a major state function and attempt to capture or kill Emperor Skywalker. The operation will either end the war in a single decisive stroke or result in the complete destruction of the rebellion's leadership. But the plan's greatest strength is also its greatest weakness. Success depends entirely on the twins' ability to get close enough to their father to overcome his defenses, something that will be impossible if he suspects their true intentions. The mission requires them to convincingly portray repentant children seeking forgiveness, while actually preparing to commit the ultimate act of familial betrayal. The psychological preparation for such a mission proves almost as challenging as the tactical planning. Luke and Leia must reconcile their genuine love for their father with their absolute commitment to destroying the system he represents. They must find ways to suppress their natural emotional responses while maintaining the kind of authentic family dynamics that will convince Emperor Skywalker of their sincerity. The final approach to Coruscant takes place during the Empire's anniversary celebrations, a galaxy-wide festival that commemorates the establishment of order and the end of the Clone Wars' chaos. The irony of using such an occasion for an assassination attempt is not lost on anyone involved, but the increased security and diplomatic activity also provide cover for inserting rebellion operatives into the Imperial capital. Luke and Leia's ship broadcasts surrender codes as it approaches Coruscant, transmitting messages of contrition and requests for Imperial mercy that are calculated to appeal to their father's hope for reconciliation. The performance is convincing enough to get them through the planetary defense networks and into the palace's landing bays, but maintaining the deception once they are face-to-face with Emperor Skywalker will require acting abilities that could determine the fate of the galaxy. The reunion takes place in the throne room where Leia was sentenced just weeks earlier. But the atmosphere is completely different. Instead of the formal trial proceedings that had characterized their last meeting, this encounter has the tentative, emotional quality of a family attempting to heal old wounds. Emperor Skywalker's relief at having his children return to him is clearly genuine, even if his trust in their loyalty remains qualified. Father, we've seen what the galaxy is like without the Empire's protection. The rebel bases we visited were full of suffering and desperation, exactly the kind of chaos you've worked to eliminate. We understand now why your methods are necessary, even if they seemed harsh when we first learned about them. Luke's words are carefully crafted to confirm everything their father wants to believe about their experience in rebellion, while avoiding any specific claims that could be contradicted by Imperial intelligence. The performance is masterful, conveying sincerity while concealing the true depth of their transformation. Leia's contribution to the deception focuses on political rather than emotional arguments, acknowledging the effectiveness of Imperial governance while expressing regret for her previous inability to appreciate its necessity. I let idealistic thinking cloud my judgment, Father. The rebellion showed me what happens when good intentions aren't backed up by the strength to implement them effectively. I want to help build the Empire's future, not undermine it through naive resistance to practical realities. Emperor Skywalker's response to their apparent contrition reveals both his desperate desire to rebuild his family and his continuing suspicion about their true motivations. The man who can sense deception in political opponents struggles to maintain objectivity when dealing with his own children. Torn between hope and hard-learned caution. I want to believe you both, more than you can possibly understand. Losing you was the most painful experience of my life since your mother's death. But trust, once broken, must be rebuilt gradually through demonstrated commitment rather than words alone. The test he proposes will determine whether Luke and Leia have truly returned to the fold or are merely playing elaborate roles in service of rebellion goals. They will be given joint command of an operation to eliminate a major resistance cell, proving their loyalty through actions that will be impossible to fake or manipulate. The mission represents exactly the kind of impossible choice that the twins had hoped to avoid. They must either betray fellow rebels to maintain their cover, or refuse the assignment and confirm their father's suspicions about their true loyalties. Either option leads to outcomes that could destroy any possibility of completing their assassination mission. The solution they eventually choose reflects the kind of desperate creativity that has characterized the best rebellion operations throughout the conflict. Rather than accepting or refusing the assignment directly, they propose modifications that will allow them to appear to comply while actually protecting the rebels they are supposed to eliminate. Their plan involves feeding false intelligence to Imperial forces while secretly warning the resistance cell about the impending attack, creating a scenario where the rebels can escape while leaving behind evidence suggesting they were eliminated in the assault. The deception requires perfect timing and enormous risks, but it offers the only path forward that doesn't require them to choose between their mission and their principles. The operation unfolds exactly as planned, with Imperial forces attacking an apparently occupied rebel base that has actually been evacuated hours earlier. The evidence left behind convinces most observers that the resistance cell has been destroyed, while the rebels themselves escape to fight another day. Luke and Leia's apparent success in eliminating a major threat to Imperial security earns them their father's renewed trust and access to the inner circles of power, where their real mission can finally be completed. But Emperor Skywalker's reaction to their success reveals that he has not been entirely convinced by their performance. While publicly praising their effectiveness and dedication, he privately implements additional security measures that suggest continuing doubts about their loyalty. The increased surveillance and restricted access that follow their supposed triumph make the assassination mission significantly more difficult to execute. The final confrontation comes during a private family meeting called ostensibly to discuss Luke and Leia's future roles in Imperial governance, but actually serving as Emperor Skywalker's final test of their loyalty. The setting is intimate rather than formal, taking place in his private study rather than the throne room. But the stakes are just as high as any state proceeding. I've been thinking about your experiences with the rebellion, and I realize that I may have been too quick to dismiss some of your earlier concerns about Imperial policy. Perhaps there are ways to maintain order and security while providing more opportunities for individual expression and local autonomy. The offer represents everything Luke and Leia once hoped their father might become: a ruler willing to moderate his authoritarian impulses in response to legitimate criticism. It's exactly the kind of compromise that could have prevented their rebellion if it had been offered years earlier, and it forces them to confront the possibility that their assassination mission might no longer be necessary. But the twins have learned too much about the true nature of Imperial rule to be swayed by promises of gradual reform. They understand that any concessions their father might make would be tactical rather than fundamental, designed to reduce resistance rather than address the underlying problems with absolute power. The conversation becomes their final attempt to reach him through persuasion before resorting to violence. Father, the problem isn't specific policies that can be adjusted or reformed. It's the entire concept of one person making decisions for billions of others without their consent or input. No matter how wise or benevolent a ruler might be, that kind of concentrated power inevitably leads to injustice and oppression. Luke's words carry the weight of everything he has learned during his time with the rebellion, but they also reflect his genuine love for his father and his desperate hope that violence might still be avoided. The appeal is both political and personal, a final attempt to save not just the galaxy, but Emperor Skywalker's soul. Emperor Skywalker's response reveals the fundamental impossibility of reconciliation between their positions. His worldview has been shaped by decades of experience, with the consequences of weak governance and political chaos, making him incapable of accepting that freedom might be worth the risks it entails. Luke, you speak as if the galaxy's peoples are capable of governing themselves wisely. But I've seen what happens when they're given that opportunity. They tear themselves apart through petty conflicts and short-sighted decision-making. The peace and prosperity we enjoy now exists because someone is willing to make the hard choices that democratic processes cannot handle. The philosophical debate that follows covers ground that neither side can concede without abandoning their core beliefs. Luke and Leia argue for the inherent dignity of choice and the importance of individual autonomy, while their father maintains that practical results matter more than theoretical principles. The conversation reveals not just political disagreement, but fundamentally different understandings of human nature and moral responsibility. The moment when words give way to action comes when Emperor Skywalker finally acknowledges what he has suspected all along. His children have not returned to seek reconciliation, but to complete the mission that brought them back to Coruscant. The revelation transforms their family reunion into the confrontation that will determine the galaxy's future. I sense your intentions now, more clearly than I want to. You haven't come here to rebuild our family or help improve the Empire. You're here to destroy everything I've built, to plunge the galaxy back into the chaos I've spent decades preventing. I won't let that happen, no matter how much it costs me personally. The battle that erupts in the confines of the private study is unlike anything in the galaxy's recorded history. This is not political opponents settling disputes through combat, but family members whose love for each other has become indistinguishable from their commitment to irreconcilable principles. Every lightsaber strike carries 20 years of shared history. Every force-powered attack is deflected by someone who helped teach the techniques being used against them. Emperor Skywalker's power is overwhelming, enhanced by decades of experience and the kind of focused rage that comes from ultimate betrayal. But Luke and Leia fight with something their father has lost: hope for something better than the current state of affairs. Their coordination is perfect, each twin anticipating the other's moves and creating openings that neither could achieve alone. The duel destroys the study's elegant furnishings and leaves scorch marks on walls that have witnessed some of the galaxy's most important political decisions. But more importantly, it represents the final collapse of the Skywalker family and everything it once represented. The bonds of love and loyalty that should protect families from external threats have become the weapons with which they destroy each other. As the battle reaches its climax, all three combatants understand that only one outcome is possible. The philosophical differences that divide them cannot be resolved through compromise or negotiation. Someone must win decisively, imposing their vision on the galaxy regardless of the cost. The question is whether the twins' shared strength can overcome their father's individual power, whether hope can triumph over despair given form and substance. The answer comes when Luke and Leia coordinate their final attack, using techniques their father taught them to exploit weaknesses he never intended to create. Their lightsabers move in perfect synchronization, creating patterns of light and energy that overwhelm even Emperor Skywalker's legendary defenses. For the first time in decades, Anakin Skywalker finds himself outmatched by opponents whose skills equal his own, but whose cause gives them strength he has forgotten how to access. The end, when it comes, is both dramatic and strangely peaceful. Emperor Skywalker falls not with curses and threats, but with something approaching relief. The burden of absolute power, the weight of making impossible decisions for an entire galaxy, the loneliness of standing apart from everyone else. All of it finally lifts from his shoulders as consciousness fades for the final time. His last words are not defiant proclamations or bitter recriminations, but a simple expression of love for the children who have chosen to destroy him rather than accept his vision of order. In death, he becomes again the man he once was, not the emperor who ruled through fear and absolute authority, but Anakin Skywalker, the father who loved his children more than his own life. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I became, what I made you become. The words escape his lips as a whisper, barely audible above the hum of deactivating lightsabers and the distant sounds of Imperial alarms beginning to sound throughout the palace. Luke and Leia kneel beside their father's fallen form, and for a moment, the political becomes personal again, as they mourn not the tyrant they have defeated, but the man who raised them and whom they still love, despite everything he has done. But there is no time for extended grief. The Emperor's death will send shockwaves throughout the Imperial hierarchy, and the palace will soon be swarming with security forces seeking to determine what happened and who might be responsible. Luke and Leia must escape Coruscant before the full weight of the Imperial war machine can be brought to bear against them. Their flight from the Imperial capital becomes a race against time, as news of the Emperor's assassination spreads throughout the galaxy with lightning speed. Some Imperial commanders immediately declare martial law and begin hunting for the perpetrators, while others see opportunity in the sudden power vacuum and begin positioning themselves to claim authority over various sectors and systems. The carefully constructed unity that Emperor Skywalker had imposed through force of personality and absolute power begins to fracture within hours of his death. Regional governors who had chafed under Imperial oversight declare independence, while military commanders compete for control of strategic resources and key installations. The galaxy that had known unprecedented peace and order suddenly finds itself on the brink of chaos as various factions vie for dominance. But the immediate collapse of Imperial authority also provides opportunities for the rebellion that had seemed impossible just days earlier. Resistance cells that had been operating in deep cover suddenly find themselves able to act openly as Imperial security focuses on internal power struggles rather than hunting rebels. Weapons, caches, and communication networks that had been carefully hidden for years can finally be activated and used to coordinate a galaxy-wide uprising. Mon Mothma's reaction to news of the Emperor's death reflects both the triumph of achieving their primary objective and the daunting challenge of what comes next. The rebellion had been united by their opposition to Imperial tyranny. But with that tyranny suddenly removed, the diverse coalition of resistance movements must somehow transform itself into a functioning government capable of restoring order without repeating the mistakes of the past. The provisional government that emerges from emergency rebellion councils attempts to balance competing demands for revenge against imperial collaborators, reconstruction of damaged systems, and prevention of the kind of chaos that had originally enabled Emperor Skywalker's rise to power. It's a delicate balancing act that requires compromise and moderation from groups that have become accustomed to operating in the shadows and thinking in terms of absolute opposition. Luke and Leia find themselves thrust into leadership roles they never sought. Their status as the Emperor's children making them symbols of both imperial legitimacy and rebellion victory. Their unique position allows them to serve as bridges between former imperial systems seeking to negotiate their integration into the new order and rebellion factions demanding justice for decades of oppression. But their greatest challenge comes not from external political pressures, but from the internal struggle to define what kind of leaders they want to become. Having grown up with absolute power and witnessed its corrupting effects firsthand, they must find ways to exercise authority responsibly while remaining accountable to the people they serve. The process of establishing new governmental structures becomes a test of everything they learned during their time in the rebellion about the importance of democratic processes and individual rights. The temptation to use their influence to impose quick solutions to complex problems must be balanced against their commitment to the principles that made their rebellion necessary in the first place. The new galactic constitution that eventually emerges from months of negotiations and debates represents a deliberate rejection of the centralized authority that had characterized both the Republic and the Empire. Power is distributed among multiple levels of government, with strong protections for individual rights and mechanisms for peaceful resolution of disputes between different systems and regions. The document also includes specific provisions designed to prevent any single individual from accumulating the kind of absolute power that Emperor Skywalker had wielded. Term limits, checks and balances, and requirements for broad consensus on major policy decisions are all incorporated into the new system's fundamental structure. But perhaps most importantly, the Constitution establishes the principle that governmental authority derives from the consent of the governed, rather than the supposed wisdom or strength of rulers. The idea that people have the right to make their own choices, even when those choices might lead to suboptimal outcomes, becomes the foundation for everything that follows. The implementation of these principles proves more difficult than their articulation, as practical governance requires making concrete decisions that affect real people's lives. The luxury of pure opposition that had characterized the rebellion gives way to the messy compromises and imperfect solutions that define actual administration. Former imperial worlds struggle with the transition from efficient authoritarian rule to the more chaotic but ultimately more legitimate processes of democratic governance. Some systems experience temporary instability as local populations work out their own approaches to self-rule, while others adapt quickly to their new freedoms and begin implementing innovative solutions to long-standing problems. The economic transformation proves particularly challenging as the imperial system's state-directed approach to resource allocation must be replaced with market mechanisms that respect individual choice while preventing the kind of exploitation that had characterized the old Republic. Finding the right balance between efficiency and equity requires constant adjustment and experimentation. Luke's role in the new government focuses primarily on the establishment of a new Jedi Order, one that learns from the mistakes of both the Old Republic-era organization and the Sith traditions that his father had embraced. The new Jedi serve not as generals or political leaders, but as counselors and mediators who help resolve disputes and provide guidance to those seeking to understand their connection to the Force. The training methods developed for this new generation of Force users emphasize emotional honesty and personal responsibility, rather than the detachment that had characterized the old order. Students learn to acknowledge and work with their feelings, rather than suppressing them, understanding that emotions can be sources of strength and wisdom when properly channeled. But the new Jedi also learn the importance of humility and limitations, understanding that their abilities do not give them the right to make decisions for others or impose their will on those who disagree with them. The Force is treated as a gift that comes with responsibilities rather than privileges, a tool for service rather than domination. Leia's path leads her toward diplomatic and administrative roles, where her political acumen and understanding of governmental processes can help build bridges between different factions and interests. Her experience growing up within the imperial system gives her unique insights into the challenges of governance, while her time with the rebellion provides her with commitment to democratic principles and individual rights. The work of reconstruction takes years rather than months, as the new government must not only establish its own legitimacy, but also deal with the legacy of decades of authoritarian rule. Former imperial officials must be evaluated individually to determine who can be trusted with positions of responsibility in the new system, while regions that had been oppressed under the old regime require massive investments in infrastructure and education. The process is complicated by the emergence of various splinter groups and successor movements that claim to represent the true legacy of Emperor Skywalker's vision. Some former Imperial commanders refuse to accept the new government's authority and establish independent fiefdoms in remote sectors, while others attempt to organize resistance movements aimed at restoring the old order. These challenges test the new government's commitment to its own principles, as the temptation to use authoritarian methods to deal with authoritarian opponents becomes almost overwhelming at times. The decision to address these threats through patient negotiation and legal processes, rather than overwhelming force, represents a conscious choice to accept short-term instability in service of long-term legitimacy. The galaxy that emerges from this tumultuous period is messier and less efficient than what existed under Emperor Skywalker's rule, but it is also more vibrant and creative. The diversity of approaches to governance and social organization that flourishes under the new system produces innovations and solutions that no single centralized authority could have developed. Art and literature experience a renaissance as censorship restrictions are lifted and creators are free to explore themes and ideas that had been forbidden under imperial rule. Educational systems diversify and experiment with different approaches to learning, while scientific research expands into areas that had been restricted or discouraged under the old regime. But perhaps most importantly, the galaxy develops a culture of civic engagement and political participation that had been absent for decades. Citizens learn to see themselves not as subjects to be governed, but as participants in the ongoing project of building a better society. The responsibility for making difficult choices is shared among many rather than concentrated in the hands of a few. The success of this transformation is measured not in terms of perfect outcomes or the elimination of all problems, but in the establishment of processes and institutions that can adapt and evolve in response to changing circumstances. The new government's greatest achievement is not solving all of the galaxy's problems, but creating systems that allow people to work together to address challenges as they arise. Years later, as Luke and Leia reflect on the path that brought them from Imperial heirs to leaders of a free galaxy, they understand that their greatest victory was not the defeat of their father's tyranny, but the proof that alternative approaches to governance could actually work in practice. The choice they made to resist absolute power, despite the personal costs involved, helped demonstrate that hope and principle could triumph over despair and pragmatism. The memory of Emperor Skywalker serves as both cautionary tale and reminder of how good intentions can be corrupted by unchecked power. The man who had sought to prevent suffering through control had ultimately created more pain than he prevented, demonstrating the inherent dangers of any system that concentrates too much authority in too few hands. But his legacy also includes the children who chose a different path, who learned from his mistakes without repeating them, and who proved that it was possible to build something better from the ruins of what came before. In their success, the galaxy finds not just political liberation, but validation of the idea that sentient beings can govern themselves wisely when given the opportunity and support to do so. The story of the Emperor's fall and the galaxy's rebirth becomes a foundational myth for the new civilization that emerges, a reminder that freedom requires constant vigilance and that the price of peace cannot be the surrender of the principles that make life worth living. Future generations learn not just about the dangers of tyranny, but about the possibility of building societies based on consent, cooperation, and respect for individual dignity. In the end, the question posed by this alternative history is not whether the galaxy would have been better or worse under continued imperial rule, but whether the choice between order and freedom is a false one. The new government's success suggests that it is possible to achieve both stability and liberty, but only through the patient work of building institutions that serve people rather than ruling them. The twins' journey from imperial heirs to democratic leaders demonstrates that even those raised in systems of absolute power can choose differently when confronted with the human costs of authoritarianism. Their transformation offers hope that no one is permanently locked into patterns of domination and control, and that change is always possible for those willing to pay the price of growth and self-examination. That's our theory. The Star Wars universe is a galaxy filled with exciting stories and possibilities, and we love exploring them. If you want to accompany us on this journey to a galaxy far, far away, then please like, share, and subscribe to our channel.